Welcome. Visiting the values of Constitution would mean going to the first principles. The Constitution of the country takes us to the first principles, the basic values which the particular country appreciates, values in terms of which that particular state wants to test its laws. The Constitution gives a definite direction for the way the justice system is to function. Therefore, the students of law, students of constitution have to first learn the grammar of the language in which the text is composed, then the law of interpretation. Law of interpretation of statutes is a more specific tool to reach at the values of the composed texts. So Constitution of India, in terms of the authorities, the interpretive authorities of the Supreme Court and of different high courts, and even the commentaries by the authors, point out that this document is to be taken as the source document, as it is a very lengthy document. As such, it is to be read in such a way to give it a comprehensive, integrated perspective of it. The first concept which is to be comprehended well is the concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty of a state as a universal domain. Sovereignty is taken as of universal domain, universal expansion, universal powers. It appears that sovereign is one who doesn't accept any limitation. Sovereign is one who does not accept power of anybody else over it. Sovereign is one who is capable of taking any decision. Sovereign is one whose acts are not subject of challenge. Sovereign is one whose acts and commands are respected. Now, these are the general features of a sovereign. However, in the context of written constitutions like ours, this sovereignty is not permitted to remain in one source or one institution or one individual. Sovereignty is divided, sovereignty is distributed, sovereignty is vested in different institutions. Therefore, we as students of law, we as students of constitution, we as scholars, we as advocates have to be realistic in our approach to appreciate this sovereignty. Now, as we have at previous occasions glimpsed as that the sovereignty of India is having first chunk taken out of it, the same is vested in the citizens themselves in the form of fundamental rights. The fundamental rights of the individuals are the basic chunk of the sovereignty. The sovereignty of India in the form of fundamental rights is vested in the citizens themselves. So let us have a pass and see if the citizens exploit their sovereignty, if the citizens are not sensitive to the values of the fundamental rights vested in them. If citizens do not realize the importance of fundamental rights being vested in them, in that form, they are sovereigns. So each citizen of India is sovereign to the extent of the fundamental rights vested in him. So how individual is availing this domain, this vesting of sovereignty in him. So if individuals are not capable of coming up to the expectations of the sovereignty vested in them, then we can imagine what ultimately is going to be the effect upon the sovereignty of India itself. The second aspect of sovereignty in the context of Indian Constitution is that it is remaining chunk, means that what remains after the fundamental rights of the individuals are taken out of it, that as well is divided into broadly three parts: as executive, as legislative, and as judiciary. As far as the judiciary is concerned, its role is practically in the exercise of interpretation of the laws, adjudications in case of differences, may it be of adverse litigations or otherwise. This interpretive concept of sovereignty vested in judiciary that way takes us to the laws enacted. So it directly gets coordinated with the legislative sovereignty of the country. The legislative sovereignty of the country is vested in the legislature. And this as well, because of the federal structure, is divided in the union list and the state lists. The union list of legislative areas and states legislative areas are distinct, but in between there is a third list which is designated as a concurrent list. So there is a concurrent list of the legislative area. This concurrent list of the legislative area gives powers, vests responsibilities both in states and the center union. Therefore, to appreciate the legislative sovereignty, we have to glance through the schedules which enlist the legislative domain of the union, legislative domain of the states, and the concurrent legislative domain of the union and the states both. Then, while having a glimpse over this legislative domain, it in a way is demarcating the executive domain as well, as different laws are ultimately in their functional apparatus depend upon the executive itself. As we have previously glimpsed, the state sovereignty, means the Indian sovereignty, is in a demarcated form. However, still the residue, whatever it may remain, that which have not been given or which does not appear to be having been given in a specific component or specific organ of the state, then it be taken as that it is vested with the executive. Now, this broad division of the sovereignty as it is, when is appreciated in the index of reality, then we see that our democratic apparatus is such that executive is always and throughout under the power of the legislature itself, as the executive, as cabinet, is to be blessed with the majority of the legislature. This, in a way, takes us to such an apparatus, such a mechanism in which it can be said that sovereignty has been made functional in such a way that at each and every step, all the different repositories, reservoirs of sovereigns, may it be executive, legislature, or judiciary, become interdependent, interrelated, intercoordinated. And then the big chunk of the sovereignty which is vested in the citizens in the form of their fundamental rights, they as well are playing their role, importing and imposing their will upon all other sovereign organs, may it be executive, legislature, or judiciary, in the form of their democratic right to elect the particular persons. So, this right to vote, together with the fundamental right of the citizen, as such, is a tool, is a constitutional mechanism, is a constitutional apparatus of Indian Constitution which deserves to be appreciated. It is only with the appreciation of this mechanism we can have the appreciation of the values of the Constitution of India as far as its apparatus is for exercise of the sovereignty. Now, one may have many case studies, and one of the case study will be to see how at different points of time Supreme Court has given interpretation to the fundamental rights, particularly the fundamental right of life and liberty under Article 21. Now, the word, the concept, the phrase life as is used as a word of a language when is before the court all these years, it has expanded like a full Bible. It has expanded as that perhaps it is of infinite range. See, the right to education has become a fundamental right. Therefore, as students of the Constitution of India, the science and art of interpretation is to be learned, is to be imbibed, The art and science of interpretation of the Constitution is an independent discipline. Therefore, we shall be through one of the texts of law of interpretation of the Constitution. Law of interpretation in general may not be specific for the specific reach within the values domain of the Constitution. So, the art and science of interpretation of Constitution is one subject, is one discipline which deserves to be entered upon. It is the degree of success of this art which ultimately is going to be the degree of our knowledge of the law itself. Therefore, while we will be imbibing the values of art and science of interpretation, we shall be conscious as that this exercise is not an academic exercise. This exercise is the real life exercise. The reality of life and ideals of life or otherwise are absolutely two distinct disciplines. So we have to remain, we shall ever be conscious as that we are entering the reality domain. The reality is certainly much different than idealism. Therefore, we as an advocates are more near the reality than we as research scholars or academic teachers. Therefore, the art and science of interpretation of the constitutional values by the advocates is certainly going to be of different teaching steps, different learning steps. How far we can be parallel with the realistic teaching and learning steps of art and science of interpretation of the Constitution as an advocates. It is this appreciation which is ultimately going to be our valuable tool. Now, coming back to the Article 21, the fundamental right of life and liberty, let us take it an exercise as to how this article stands interpreted and expanded to bring within it more and more aspects of life within the domain of a fundamental right of life. It is this enlistment which will give us the proper perspective of the values of the Constitution as well as the art of interpretation as well. Therefore, let us be through the argumentative reach at such interpretations in different authorities. Each authority upon the interpretation of the term life deserves to be followed step by step. The logic in terms of which the term life has been interpreted for including within it different realistic aspects of life as of the order of the fundamental right is the value which we have to imbibe. Therefore, each authority deserves to be chased, to be imbibed fully. Once we will be parallel with the logic of interpretation, the reasoning steps of reach, and the conclusions, taking illustratively how the right of education is a right of life and so a fundamental right. Let us put to ourselves, if we are confronted with the exercise to interpret the right of life, to right of pure drinking water or pure air or poison free environment or the municipal authorities functional responsibilities, etc., 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 then how we will approach them, how we will reason them, how will we will reach at the conclusions. So take one exercise, whether the right to have a pure drinking water is coming within the domain of life as a fundamental right under Article 21 or not. Please reach at it and share with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.